Hello again. Again, thanks for being here. I'm so pleased that you're taking out this time. I will try to use it as best I can for you. So we're going to look at this idea of compassion fatigue and what to do about it. And it's an interesting point for me because I first really learned about compassion in detail after I had moved over to the Himalayas and I was living up in the mountains with the Tibetans, and I studied Tibetan language and I studied Buddhist philosophy, with them before came back as an interpreter, translator as well. But they go into a great deal of detail about compassion, what it is, how to recognize it, how to cultivate it, and the benefits of cultivating it, the drawbacks of not cultivating it, these sorts of things. And so years later, when I came back and I went back and did a psychology degree, and even now, as I'm doing my PhD here, based on meditation and burnout, that I have discovered that our English language use and a lot of psychology's use of compassion, this word, is pretty much the same as it was everything I learned up, when I was in India, which is great because I had previously been sort of trying to convince people, if we're going to talk about compassion, let's use these kind of Buddhist definitions. And then one day I thought, well, I should probably just look it up, look it up in the dictionary. So I did. I looked it up, and sure enough, our English language version of compassion is very much the same as everything I'd been saying. So that was very easy. And also our English language very clearly differentiates between empathy and compassion, right? And so this is the important part, because no matter realistically, when you're talking about the type of stress that you and burnout that people suffer from, just by constantly dealing with other people's distress, healthcare professionals, psychologists, social workers, teachers even, that really, you really do have this sense of taking on all this extra load, but which causes you this extra stress and burnout. But that extra stress and burnout is not caused by compassion. To call something compassion fatigue is a terrible mistake. There's not really any such thing as compassion fatigue. What brings that about is empathic distress. Okay, so it's actually this empathy that has you resonating along with others, the cause of the problem. But before I jump too far, let me just share my screen. I'll show you some slides and walk you through it. Okay, here we go. So, well, let's start here. Have you ever felt kind of overwhelmed by these difficulties of other people? I'd be willing to bet healthcare professionals have. Have you been told or even just thought, I care too much? This is a terrible mistake. Maybe that you've been told to keep a professional distance, which again, most people struggle to do, whatever that really is. Maybe been warned about compassion fatigue and still felt overwhelmed. So if that's the case, I've got to say, from where I'm sitting, from my perspective, it really isn't your fault. And I'm going to try to help clear that up right here, right now. So I mentioned before in the introduction that I talk about dealing with stress in two main ways. It's just oversimplification, but it makes it easier. Drown it out or figure it out. And this is very much about figuring it out, understanding it, and then knowing what to do. So we're going to look at empathy and compassion because, as it says, nobody cares too much. Or you could say there's no such thing as compassion fatigue. Right? It's an approach I've had a lot of success with all sorts of healthcare professionals, educators, other carers, just people who've been felt overwhelmed by everything that happened back in 2020 or is still happening now, realistically. And that means oncology nurses, paramedics and so on, all sorts. So let's have a look at a dictionary definition of empathy. We have the action of understanding, being aware of the experience of another without those feelings, thoughts, experience communicated in an objectively explicit manner. So one way or another, we're talking about sharing in the experience of somebody else. And usually when we're talking about healthcare or mental health care, we're talking about the distress of someone else. So is that sharing? There are two types, and this is really, maybe it's unfortunate that these two get lumped together because they're actually differentiable, they're different. But there's a cognitive type of empathy where you can observe, say, something happening to somebody else and intellectually thinking, that would suck. I understand it, without actually feeling the same distress. We call it cognitive empathy, or there's affective empathy, where we actually share in the experience. And one of the most important researchers in this field, Paul Ekman, he talks about it as resonating. It is resonating. He calls it high and low resonators. And of course, high resonators, people who tend to have this affective empathy and resonate with the distress of others, often end up in these caring roles, healthcare professionals, teachers, and so on. And that's a problem, of course, because they're sharing in the experiences of others so much, they're constantly encountering others in difficulty, and all of a sudden they're sharing that difficulty, right? Their stress level goes up just because of the type of job they're doing. And they're doing that job just because they're the type of person they are. So it's a real problem. But I hope maybe it's clear already that it's empathy that's causing that, right? Empathy is the issue. Now, if we just move on a little bit, because we're mostly interested in this affective empathy, right? That's what's driving burnout for people realistically, that doubling up of stress. And if we look at compassion, well, again, taken from the same dictionary, they call it a sympathetic consciousness. It's understanding of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. And so what becomes important here is that understanding of somebody else's distress, in this case, is really empathy. So what you've got is compassion is actually just a desire to alleviate suffering. It's mental, it's cognitive. There are actions driven by that, but really it's just the mental aspect of wishing that another be free of suffering, or oneself. You can have compassion for yourself, is very much allowed. I encourage it. That wish that suffering be alleviated, right? That's compassion. In order to have that compassion, certainly for others, you need to have the empathy. So it's this weird situation where empathy is what causes the distress. Empathy is what drives people to burnout. But you also need empathy to develop compassion, and compassion will actually save you from that empathic distress. That's why there's lots of research been going on for some time, but it's really been picking up steam in the last, 7 to 10 years on the benefits of developing compassion using even quite traditional techniques, meditation techniques and so on, that can transform just empathy into empathy qualified by compassion, and it saves people from distress. There's a lot of mechanics and science behind that and how it works. If you look into some of my other trainings on emotions and attention, especially, these three things all link together really well: emotions, attention, mindfulness, you could say, and this empathic distress, compassion fatigue issue. So look, it works like this. Imagine this on a timeline. We have an empathic response, okay? That empathic response, what it does is, as soon as I encounter someone else in difficulty, then sets off this resonance in me. And what that does is really captures my attention. That's what happens when we're stressed. So it's when you're stressed, you're emotional. And what emotions do is they narrow your focus down into just hear what's happening to you right now. So when I'm emotional, whether it's anger, sadness, fear, enjoyable emotions, doesn't matter. It gets narrowed down into what's happening to me right now. It's just a short-term thing, actually, emotions. And empathy can be an emotional trigger because I see someone else who's sad and now I feel sad. I see someone else angry, I feel angry. Someone else who's afraid, or any combination of those, it happens to me too. And now that I'm emotional, it's actually become about me. And a lot of the actions I'm going to take now, especially if I don't think about them, if I just go automatically, are going to be about regulating my mood, trying to dial down whatever emotion is I'm experiencing. And what this means is I can engage in quite beneficial actions. If there is a baby crying, needs changing, for example. A baby cry is a classic example of like evolutionary using empathy. You hear that baby cry, it just captures your attention. It really upsets you and motivates you. But not all of that motivation is necessarily about the actual child, right? Once they've got you, it's a very clever evolutionary trick. Once that baby's cry has got me distressed, then a lot of what I'm going to do will be actually about alleviating my own distress. Maybe not 100%, maybe not even 75%, but it will be mixed, right? And the less I think about it, the more it becomes about my mood regulation, the more it's a shared experience of distress, and there's less compassion, more empathy. I hope this is clear. I know I'm unloading on you fairly quickly. That's okay. You can watch this back. So here's what happens. Empathy captures my attention because I'm emotional, it becomes mostly about me. That's okay. That's just what emotions do. Doesn't make me a bad person, right? It's just how they work. And then, of course, what that leads to eventually is some emotional exhaustion, burnout, or what is erroneously, what is mistakenly called compassion fatigue. When in actual fact, it's not compassion fatigue at all, right? What it is, and what we should be calling it, is this: empathic distress. That's what's happening. I'm distressed because my empathic response. It's making me emotional, and now I'm just, hyper emotional. And yeah, it's a problem. It's very real, and it just happens because you're basically normal. You have a normal functioning attention and emotion system, but it's qualified by probably a high-ish resonance, that you tend to resonate more highly with the emotions and distress and what experience of others. And when that happens, if we don't do anything about that, that is a one-way ticket to burnout. It's not that empathy is bad. It's just that on its own, it's problematic. On its own, when you throw it into situations that are about dealing with distress, then yeah, you're basically in a one-way trip to burnout, as I said. It doesn't have to be that way. If you do a bit of mindfulness training, or what I'm going to show, you can interrupt this empathic response, this automatic response that I'm going to talk about. So you have an empathic response, and you bring your attention under your control. So you notice it happen, and then when you know that, oh, this is an empathic response, and I know that, and I know to relax, then the rest of it can't happen. If I go backwards, a lot of what's happening relies on this kind of, I'm emotional, which is attentional capture, right? My attention is pulled away, and now I'm sort of stressed. You pull your attention back, and this goes away. But of course, that's not really enough, because you still have to deal with whatever's in front of you. So, it's not like you can sort of just, every time you feel this empathic response, you just sort of drop down on the floor and relax, or, go have a coffee or a drink. That isn't going to work. What we need to do then is develop compassion. Remember, compassion's mental. It's simply a focus, and counterintuitively, right? Compassion is about focusing on the difficulties of others, right? And then from there, wishing that they be alleviated, right? Healthcare professionals are in an extraordinarily powerful position where not only can you wish that be alleviated, but you are actually in a position with all this training, right, to go in and actually be part of that alleviation. People like me who have only very basic first aid, we're limited in what we can actually do. And it's an interesting point. If I'm observing somebody, see someone in distress, and I'm standing next to a highly trained nurse, paramedic, doctor, surgeon, whatever it might be, and we're both here, we both have the same sort of capacity. Let's say we have the same empathic response. We both have the same capacity to develop compassion. We both go, you're really silly. I'm really, really wishing that this person be free of it. The difference is probably the best thing I could do is talk to the person next to me or call an ambulance. Whereas the person next to me can actually step in, motivated by compassion, with their focus on the other person, to go in there and really alleviate that suffering. There's another thing that could happen is you could see someone in distress and suffering. Now I get set off empathically as well. And then really just because of that, it's motivated by that stress, my stress, that I go in and deal with the situation with the person, right? Was a little kind of mental parlor trick almost, where you notice it happen and then really make sure your attention is back out on the person, right? Your stress levels go down. That really does happen, as we can talk more about that in other modules or units. And then what you are doing is developing compassion, which is being shown again and again in research, the perfect sort of outlet, if you like, for the buildup of empathic distress. So what happens here then, an empathic response, now of course I'm stressed, I relax, I bring my attention under my control, and then we talk about compassion satisfaction, what that is, people being satisfied and pleased with the work they've done and the difference they've made. Pro-social responses means working for the benefit of the people that you encounter, and so on. Yeah. So kind of, it's almost like there are these two pathways. When there's an empathic response, if we don't do anything, right, just let our natural kind of attention emotions happen, you run along this top version here. Your attention's captured, it becomes about you, and a lot of what you're doing and experiencing is your own stress is going to be driving your actions. It's exhausting. And it's exhausting for you, it's exhausting for your colleagues, right? It's exhausting for your family and friends probably when you bring it home with you, because it doesn't, you don't have to be right there in time. You can just remember things that happened in the past, right? Or worry about things in the future and have empathic responses there. You don't even have to have them happen in real time. So that's one trick. If you, of course, if you notice that happen and relax, and that's what the exercises in the rest of this module are about, teaching you to relax and put your attention back out, then what you get is this attention control, empathic concern. Now you're focused on the distress of the others. You're not motivated by your own distress, but by what's going on for the person in front, and away you go. So either way, to be honest, if you act, especially for highly trained people like yourselves, if you react automatically, you might have the same sort of outcome as if you acted, with that bottom and pulled your attention back and focused outwardly. The outcome may or may not be the same for the person in front, because either way, you're highly trained people who know what you're doing. But the people who manage to stay relaxed, pull their attention back, and really focus outward, right, and not be driven by their stress, well, they're going to burn out. It's going to take a lot more for them to burn out. In fact, over time, when you get good at this, those situations and even remembering those situations can actually improve people's mental health, right? That level of compassion and concern for others, remembering that I did what I could, that I was focused on them, and so on, brings about a lot of satisfaction for people. So, I'm unloading quite a lot on you. I hope this is okay. I know you can watch this back and you can get in touch with me if you have any questions. What mediates this, sort of difference between the automatic responding and the in control responding are things like a bit of attention training, such as mindfulness. So have a look into some other modules here on that, because that really helps you out with what we call perspective taking, or I would say an outward focus on what's in front of you, so not be driven by your own stress. And of course, emotion regulation. So essentially, what you really need to do, you need to be able to catch yourself earlier. So when you come into a situation which sets you off empathically, right, you really need to be able to catch yourself as soon as possible as that happens. And a good way to do that is to sit down and flag some situations that bring a strong empathic response. It really helps to write them down, which is why I've given some worksheets or some things below that you can use. Because stop and just spend a few minutes thinking about 3 or 4 things that are particularly strong. And of course, I'm presenting this as if you're a healthcare professional, but whether you are or not, there might be certain things you see on the television, on the news, for example, in your social media feed, who knows, that really set you off. They might be on the street or your neighbors or whoever. So write them down, flag them. And you sort of want to make a resolve that when you encounter these things, at least the first thing you do is relax, because that's the key to bringing your attention back. Once you get hyper, your attention sort of gets pulled away. Really, you need it back with under your control. Then you understand what's happening because you've listened to this and thought about what I'm presenting here, which isn't something I'm just making up. This is all very research based, of course. And when you understand everything that's happening, remember to put your attention back out onto what's in front of you with that intention, or that wish, that aspiration, that there's something done about it, that things improve for whoever it is in front of you. Whether it's a patient of yours, whether it's the family of a patient of yours, or a student, or the family of a student, and so on. Okay, so that's where it's really kind of important to understand this, but also not just understand, but to have a plan to help yourself through it. And the way to get started in this is to at least flag some important situations, as I've said. Really think about that. Makes you more likely to remember this when you encounter those situations, and then have a plan as to what you're going to do. And I would say for now, your contingency plan, if you like, it's enough just to say, I'm going to relax. When I come into this situation, I'm just going to try to just release some muscles and make sure that I'm focused, that I'm not driven by my stress, but by their issue. And I'm going to do my very best for them. And this can be done in make no mistake, a fraction of a second. Okay. Another way that you can help this, especially if you are a person who sees patients or clients one after another serially, whether they come to you in an office or whether you go from, say, bed to bed or something like this, is to have a little compassion break. And I'm talking 30 to 60 seconds at the most, actually even less, where you just, at the end of each patient or each client, You just take a moment and say, I did my best, like this will wish that there's some benefit for what you have just done. And then a little sort of resolve again, a resolution, if you like, to bring your very best attention and concern to the next person, right? And you go in. So I actually had a client of mine who's a family doctor, and she tried this, and I was sort of suggesting maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and had a little sheet for it to fill in, and just to go through each patient like this. Anyway, she found she only needed 15 to 20 seconds, and that it made such a difference, that she wasn't bringing her stress home with her. And not only that, it was getting through patients more quickly thanks to this break. So she's running ahead of schedule, which, I mean, I've yet to go to a family doctor who was running ahead of schedule in my life, which is, because I have good ones who care. That's not critical. Okay. So there really is some real valid, not just research-based sort of academic, but also real life anecdotal as evidence from plenty of people, healthcare workers, carers, parents, all kinds, who have found this type of training to really dial down that sense of empathic distress that for so long they have been mistaking as compassion fatigue. When compassion, to be clear, is the release valve, compassion is what will prevent the empathic distress. Okay, it's not a liability. Empathy on its own is a liability. Empathy combined with compassion is incredibly powerful, and it could just extend the sort of work life of so many of our healthcare professionals if this was just taught. And I mean, from a research perspective, it was just taught out there. So have a look. I've left some exercises for you to fill in, some more information for you to think about. Try these out, these worksheets. Get some hot button empathy issues in, and try to flag them, and remember, when you encounter those, what you're going to do. Relax, attend to what's in front of you, and so on. Do it for a week, maybe 2 weeks, try it out. If you have even the slightest doubt or concern or hallelujah moment, whatever it might be, just get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to discuss this through, because I've seen it work for so many people. I'd love to see it work for you. That's why I put this whole thing together. So please don't be afraid to get in touch. Even if you're skeptical, I'm more than happy to hear from you and see if I can help. All right, so good luck with it. And I will speak to you hopefully very soon.